And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 40. And we are starting out this time with Infernal Genesis, 4 black enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player mills a card. Then they create X 1/1 black minion creature tokens, where X is the milled card's mana value. This is just such an interesting card and very unique in what it's doing. I had just mentioned this in my Toxrill deck tech that I did because it's a fantastic fit in there, right? This card to me is one of the best cards if you're in a deck where you want your opponents to be having creatures, and Toxrill is the perfect example of that, in particular because at the beginning of the end step, you're going to put slime counters on all those minion tokens and they're immediately going to die. So that's why it is an absolute perfect fit in that deck. But in any deck where you want to be killing your opponent's creatures, right? A Griswold deck as well, I think this is an auto include in because those are token creatures that are probably going to be dying all the time, right? An Elenda deck, again, another deck where you probably want your opponent to have lots of creatures that are dying. A Yaheni deck. There's lots and lots of commanders out there in black that want your opponent's creatures to be dying all the time. And then, hey, as an added bonus, we get to use this too, right? So you're creating those minion tokens for yourself as well. So now you get to use those for whatever you like, attacking, sacking, whatever the case may be. Really great card. Coming in at number 2 this week, Into the Wilds, 3 and a green enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield. Really simple card, and man, I love this card. I think it's great. If I'm making a mono green deck, I put this in. Slap this down, and then for the rest of the game, you can just look at the top card of your library and your upkeep. If it happens to be a land card, you put it directly onto the battlefield, untap. That's pretty damn good advantage. But of course, it's particularly good when you can manipulate or know what's on top of your library, right? There's a lot of decks out there that are playing off the top of their library, and if you're in any of those decks, you probably have a Sensitized Divining Top type of effect where you can manipulate the top of your library. And man, if you can get a land, and it doesn't have to be a basic land, any land card on top of your library at the beginning of your upkeep, it just goes directly into play. That's pretty fantastic card advantage. Coming in at number 3 this week, and we have a heavy enchantment theme once again in this episode, Intruder Alarm. And this is a pretty infamous card. I don't know if a lot of new players know of its existence though. It is really powerful in what it's doing. It is super combo-tastic, right? There's lots of combos that exist with this. 2 and a blue enchantment. Creatures don't untap during their controller's untap step. Okay, well that's pretty good, I guess, if you're playing a stacks theme, right? Well, no, because whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you untap all creatures. So this is a card that you could put in a lot of decks, because if you want your creatures to be untapping all the time, it can be great. I mean, if you got an Arcanus the Omnipotent deck, this will be good because you can draw 3 cards, and then as soon as your opponents play a creature, your Arcanus untaps and you get to draw 3 more cards. Your opponents get to use it too, right? This is a symmetrical effect, and I really wish they kept making cards like this. They don't really make cards like this anymore. These symmetrical effects that affect everybody, and you got to figure out a way to break it, right? To make it good or better for you than it is for anyone else. Obviously, this card is super combo-tastic. There's a few ways you can go infinite with it. My favorite combo with it, though, is with Lull Mage Mentor, 1 blue Merfolk Wizard 2/2. Whenever a spell or ability you control counters a spell, you create a 1/1 blue Merfolk creature token. And you can tap 7 untapped Merfolk creature and counter target spell. So there's a little bit of setup involved here. You do need 7 Merfolk in play, but once you have the 7 and your Intruder Alarm in play, pretty much the game's over because you're going to tap those 7 to counter whatever spell your opponent plays. Then when you counter it, right, that's a spell or ability countering a spell, you now create a 1/1 Merfolk token, and when it enters the battlefield, Intruder Alarm will untap everybody and you can do it again. So that is sort of a neat little combo that I like with Intruder Alarm. Of course, there's probably a bunch. But moving on to number 4 this week, and again, another enchantment. This time it's a red one. Invasion Plans, 2 and a red enchantment. All creatures block each combat if able. That is a really powerful ability, and of course, it's an ability that you really want in a lot of decks. Even more so, though, the attacking player chooses how each creature blocks each combat. That's really interesting. So if you're in a theme like that Cardur deck where you want creatures to be blocking and therefore dying, it might be a great fit there. Also, unlike Grand Melee, right? Grand Melee is going to make all creatures attack and block. Invasion Plans doesn't force attack attacks, it only forces blocks. So it can be really important there if you're in a theme where you don't necessarily want to attack, but you want to make sure everyone's blocking. It's a very unique effect for sure. Coming in at number 5, our 5th enchantment in a row now is Ion Storm, 2 in a red enchantment with a very unique ability. You can pay 1 in a red and remove a +1/+1 counter or a charge counter from a permanent you control, and it deals 2 damage to any target. That seems pretty darn good in any +1/+1 counters theme, or possibly charge counter theme in red. Of course, you don't see it that much, so maybe that's why this card doesn't get seen that much. Grumgully obviously is probably the most notable one. The new Helena and Alayla, there's another +1/+1 counter theme commander in red that you could probably look at putting this card in that deck as well. This is just 1 in a red and remove a counter. You can do it as many times as you want, however much mana you can afford to put into this. You're throwing around 2 damage. I think that's pretty darn good in any deck like that. Coming in at number 6 is a personal favorite of mine, Ixodron, 3 blue, illusion, has power and toughness each equal to the number of face-down creatures on the battlefield. So right away you think, oh, well, this guy goes in a morph deck, right? Yeah, maybe, but I think he does so much more than that, because as Ixodron enters the battlefield, turn all other non-token creatures face down. So basically what Ixodron does is turn every creature on the battlefield into a morph creature, right? A face-down creature. However, the important part here is that they aren't actually morph creatures because they don't have a morph ability. I had this in my Tishana deck for the longest time, and I loved having it in there. I can blink it, right? So it comes back into play, and you get to reuse that enter the battlefield effect over and over and over again. And I loved playing it because I would put it in play, and my opponents would have their commander and all their other creatures flip upside down, and then they'd go, oh, well, I better kill that Ixodron, so they'd kill it, and then they go, oh, well, how come my commander's not flipping face up again? Well, because that has nothing to do with killing the Ixodron, right? Once those creatures are face down, if they don't have a morph ability or some other way to flip them back up, they stay face down. Those creatures will remain face down unless you have some way to flip them back over again. So this is a fantastic card for locking out people's commanders. I used to surprise people with this card all the time back in the day. It wasn't very well known. It did get reprinted in Commander 2019 though, however. So I think that sort of brought it to the forefront of people's minds a little bit. Yes, it is good in a morph deck. I probably would put it in there. It's going to turn your morphed creatures face down so you can reuse them again, you know, so it is good there for sure. But I think just on its own, you turn everyone's creatures face down. You know, blue's not great at board wipes. This is a great way to deal with creatures, right? Because it's going to turn them all face down and they likely won't be able to turn face up again. Another really interesting mono blue card is Juxtapose, 3 and a blue sorcery. You and target player exchange control of the creature you control with the highest mana value. Then exchange control of artifacts the same way. If 2 or more permanents a player controls are tied for the highest, their controller chooses one of them. So there's lots of exchange effects in the game. I really like this one because you're getting 2 things out of it, which you almost never see, and you're getting the highest mana value, right? So you're probably going to be getting the best thing from that player. And if you're in a deck where you don't have any high mana value stuff, right? Obviously you're going to choose when you cast this. So if you don't have anything really expensive in play and your opponent has, I don't know, like an Avacyn and an Immortal Sun sitting there, now you can swap them your Arcane Signet, which is your most expensive artifact, and your, I don't know, Spell Seeker, which is your highest mana value creature, for their Avacyn and their Immortal Sun, right? So you're going to save this card for the right moment. This is definitely a card you want to wait for the exact moment to use it. Remember, you got 3 opponents to choose from, right? And you're picking the one that has the best stuff that you can then steal. So I think it could be a really great card in a Commander game. Coming in at number 8 this week is Keeper of Progenitus, 3 and a green elf druid. 1/3. Whenever a player taps a mountain, forest, or plains for mana, that player adds 1 mana of any type that land produced. So this is a mana doubling effect for only mountains, forests, and plains. And yes, it does work for all players, but man, I'm just thinking in a Naya deck where you have all 3 of those. I've seen this in a Commander game before. I think only once. I looked on EDH Rec. It's only in 1200 decks currently. I think I could probably see a lot more play. Even if you're only in 2 of these, like maybe you're in a Gruul deck, even it might be worth it. Yes, your opponents get to take advantage of it, but again, those symmetrical effects, if you're taking more advantage of it, I think it's worth it. Coming in at number 9 this week is Kelden Twilight, 1 a black and a red enchantment at the beginning of each player's end step. If no creatures attacked this turn, that player sacrifices a creature they controlled since the beginning of the turn. So great card in any theme where you want to be attacking, or maybe even if you just want to be punishing your opponents for not attacking. A lot of decks, like control decks, they'll just sit around, like a Pillow Fort deck, something like that. So if you have a lot of guys in your play group with decks like that, this can be great where it's just forcing them to sacrifice a creature unless they attack with it. Again, another card that works in a Carder deck, I think. I've probably recommended at least 5 or 6 cards that are great in that deck. This is another one that fits well in that deck because, again, you want to be encouraging people to attack in that deck, I think. And coming in at number 10 this week is sort of a few different cards. It is this Keeper series, originally from Exodus. And there was one of each color, and they're all, I would say, usable in a Commander game. Some of them are definitely better than others, no question, but all of them are pretty good because you're choosing target opponent. And in a Commander game, of course, you have 3 opponents, probably at least, maybe more. But I think by far the best one is Keeper of the Dead. Black and a black, human wizard, 1/2. Pay a black and tap. Choose target opponent who had at least 2 or fewer creature cards in their graveyard than you did as this ability was activated. Destroy target non-black creature that player controls. So the wording on these cards is a little iffy, right? It's been errated quite a bit, so it's a little confusing. They just worded this as a way that your opponents can't completely screw you out of the ability, right? So as soon as you activated the ability, if your opponent changes the amount of cards in their graveyard, it isn't going to matter. You get this ability no matter what, as long as the condition was met when you activate it. So for this one, you're just looking for an opponent who has less creatures in their graveyard than you do. So if you have a graveyard deck, that's always going to be the case, right? If you're in any deck, like a Marin deck, or some deck where you want lots of creatures in your graveyard all the time, or maybe you're sacrificing creatures, of course, there's a ton of themes in black that are doing that. It's always going to be the case that you're going to have lots of creatures in your graveyard, and it's going to be easy for you to find an opponent that has 2 or fewer creature cards in their graveyard than you do. So this just becomes pay a black and tap, destroy target non-black creature. I think that's pretty darn good. But that is it for today. I've recommended 400 cards now for you guys. I've probably sold a whole lot of cards, and hopefully you guys are buying them off of TCG Player and using my TCG Player link. It is in the description below. Of course, it helps support the channel. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.